It was 11 degrees outside, and the woman on the bank steps wasn't crying. That's what stopped him. People cry when their world ends. They scream. They call someone. They do something. She just sat there, coat half buttoned, a cardboard box at her feet, her name badge still clipped to her blouse, like she'd forgotten she was wearing it, like she'd forgotten everything. Marcus Hale had walked past 1,000 strangers in his life. He had a daughter waiting at home, a bowl of stew on the stove, a shift that had wrecked his back, and a bus he was already late for. He had every reason to keep walking. He didn't. And what he said next would change 2 lives, hers and his. This is a true-to-life story about what we owe each other on a cold night. Stay with me. It was a Tuesday in late November. Cleveland was already done with autumn. The leaves were gone. The wind off Lake Erie had teeth, and by 7 in the evening the sidewalks downtown were nearly empty. The kind of empty that happens when the cold becomes a decision. When people stop pretending they're going to walk somewhere and just get in their cars or down into the train tunnels and go home. Marcus had just clocked out at Brennan Tower. He was 34 years old, 6'2", hands like oven mitts from 12 years of mop handles and floor buffers and industrial-grade cleaning solution that ate through gloves in a week. He worked the 4 to 7 evening shift, came home, made dinner, and put his kid to bed. That was the rhythm. His daughter Lily was 9. She was waiting at home with Mrs. Pollard from across the hall. There was beef stew in the slow cooker. He'd browned the meat that morning before his shift, the way his mother had taught him, because stew that hadn't been browned tasted like sadness. Lily had a geography quiz the next morning. Marcus had promised to help her review the state capitals, and Lily took promises seriously. She wrote them down on a post-it note on the fridge. That was the plan. 40 minutes from clock out to the front door. He had it timed. He cut down Euclid Avenue because the bus came faster on that side. Snow was starting to drift. Light, dry flakes that didn't land so much as float past, the way snow does when it's too cold to be wet. That's when he saw her. She was sitting on the granite steps of the Keystone Trust building. Not on a bench, not under the awning, on the steps in the cold. There was a cardboard box next to her. A coat folded across her lap like she'd taken it off because she couldn't decide whether to wear it or carry it. A travel mug. A small framed photograph wrapped in tissue paper sticking out of the box at an angle, like someone had packed in a hurry and didn't have time to do it right. She wasn't on her phone. She wasn't moving. Marcus slowed down. He'd seen people sit on steps before. Tired commuters, tourists checking maps. Office workers on a smoke break, the cigarette held away from the building so the smoke wouldn't drift into the lobby. This wasn't that. This was something else. The stillness was wrong. People who are tired shift. People who are waiting check their phones. She was doing neither. She was sitting the way a person sits when they don't know what comes next, and they're afraid that the moment they stand up, they'll have to figure it out. He crossed the street. "Ma'am?" She looked up. Her eyes were dry. That was the first thing he noticed. Bone dry. Like she'd already cried somewhere else, in a bathroom, in an elevator, in the back of a stairwell, and was done with it. "I'm fine," she said. 3 words, clipped, practiced. The voice of a woman who said, "I'm fine" for a living. Marcus glanced at the badge on her blouse. Eleanor Vance, branch manager. He looked at the box. He looked at the building. He looked at the security guard standing just inside the lobby, arms crossed, watching them through the glass with the bored vigilance of a man being paid to make sure she didn't come back inside. He understood. He didn't need the details. He'd seen this scene before. Different building, different person. Same shape. Someone had just been let go. And they hadn't even been allowed to stay inside while they figured out what came next. "Ma'am," he said again, "it's 11 degrees. You can't sit here. I'm waiting on a ride." "Is it coming?" She looked at her phone. The screen was black. "Battery died," she said. "Right." He stood there a second. The wind picked up. Somewhere down Euclid, a car horn. Somewhere closer, the soft electric hum of the building's lobby. Warm air she was no longer welcome to share. Now, most people in this moment would have said, "I'm sorry," and walked on. That's the polite version. That's what you do. Marcus thought about Lily. He thought about the stew. He thought about how he was already running 10 minutes late. And he thought, and this is the thing he'd remember years later, if this was my mother, I'd want someone to stop. So he stopped. "There's a diner 2 blocks up," he said. "Murphy's. They've got booths. You can charge your phone, get warm, call whoever you need to call. I'll carry the box." She stared at him. "I don't know you," she said. "No, ma'am, you don't." "Then why?" He shrugged. "Because nobody else is gonna." She didn't say yes, not out loud, but she stood up. Slowly, the way a person stands when their legs have been still too long in the cold, and they've forgotten how to trust them. Marcus picked up the box. It was heavier than it looked. A nameplate. A succulent in a small ceramic pot, the kind of thing someone gives you on your first day, a notebook. 3 picture frames. 11 years of someone's working life in one cardboard box she could carry with one arm. He didn't ask. They walked the 2 blocks in silence. Snow caught in her hair. She didn't pull her hood up. He didn't comment on it. Some people, when they're hurting, need you to not notice. At the diner, he held the door. She slid into a booth by the window. He set the box down on the bench across from her, plugged her phone into the outlet by the napkin holder, and stepped back. The diner smelled like coffee and griddle grease, and the particular sweetness of pie crust under a heat lamp. A waitress at the counter looked up, took in the situation in one glance, and went back to wiping down the menus. She'd seen worse, she'd seen better. She was good at minding her business. "There's a charger right there," Marcus said. "Waitress'll be by in a minute. Coffee here is good, pie's better." He turned to go. "Wait." He stopped. Eleanor Vance, branch manager, 38 years old, in a wool coat that probably cost more than his rent, looked up at this stranger who had carried her box. "What's your name?" "Marcus." "Marcus what?" "Marcus Hale." "Eleanor." "I know, it's on your badge." She looked down. She'd forgotten she was still wearing it. She unclipped it slowly, like it had become heavy, and set it on the table. The pin made a small sound on the formica. A sound that, in a quieter moment, might have meant nothing. In this one, it meant something. "Thank you, Marcus." "You're welcome." He left. He had a kid to get home to. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed in her apartment in Tremont and stared at the wall. She was 38. She had spent 11 years at Keystone Trust. She had started as a teller, the kind that smiled at every customer and remembered their kids' names because that was the job. She had earned every promotion. She had sat through compliance trainings in fluorescent conference rooms and management seminars in suburban hotels and quarterly reviews, where men in better suits than hers had told her she was high potential. She managed a branch with 16 employees, and $340 million in deposits. That afternoon, her regional director, a man named Whitaker, had called her into the conference room. He had a folder. He told her, in the careful language people use when they're firing you, that there had been complaints, that her management style was being reviewed, that the bank had decided to go in a different direction. He used the word unfortunately 4 times. Eleanor knew what was actually happening. She had refused 2 months earlier to approve a loan package for a developer who happened to be Whitaker's college roommate. The numbers didn't work, the collateral was inflated. The repayment schedule assumed a tenant occupancy rate that hadn't been seen in that part of Cleveland since 2007. She'd documented why. She'd written a memo. She'd said no. Now she was going in a different direction. Security had escorted her to her desk. She had 20 minutes to pack. Her key card was deactivated before she reached the lobby. She knew because she heard the small click in the badge reader as she walked the conference room. A sound she'd heard 1,000 times signaling access, now signaling its absence. And then she had sat down on the steps, because her car was in the parking garage, and the parking garage required her keycard, and her keycard was in a plastic bag in Whitaker's office, with her stapler and her desk plant and the ceramic mug her sisters had given her 3 Christmases ago that said, "World's okayest banker." She had tried to call a cab. Her phone died. The cold drained the battery faster than she expected, and she hadn't charged it that morning because she'd had no reason to think she'd need to. She had tried to think. Her brain wouldn't work, so she just sat. And then a man in a janitor's uniform had appeared and said, "You can't sit here." And he had said it not like a security guard, not like a stranger telling her to move along, not like someone performing concern for the optics. He had said it like he was worried about her. Eleanor had not been worried about by a stranger in a very, very long time. Her career had been built on the opposite, on being the one who handled things, on being the woman whose name appeared on the after-hours emergency contact list, on being competent in a way that meant nobody ever had to ask if she was okay. She had never minded that, had been proud of it, actually, until tonight. Until tonight, when the question had been useful, and there had been no one trained to ask it. And then there was. That was why she couldn't sleep. The next morning, Eleanor put on a different coat and went looking for Marcus Hale. She didn't know why. She told herself she wanted to repay him, buy him a coffee, slip him $50, something clean and finished, something that fit inside a transaction. That was the story she told herself. But the truth she only admitted later, was that she had been treated like a problem for the last 16 hours, and one person had treated her like a human being, and she needed to look him in the face one more time to make sure he was real. She started at the diner. The waitress remembered her. The lady with the box. "He's a regular. Marcus, sure, comes in maybe once a week, real quiet, tips good. Do you know where he works?" The waitress hesitated. She had the kind of face that said she was used to people asking after men, and she'd learned to be careful about who she answered for. "Ma'am, I don't really." "I'm not." Eleanor stopped, tried again. "He helped me last night. I just want to thank him properly." The waitress studied her face for a moment. Then she said, "Brennan Tower. He runs the cleaning crew there. Evenings." Eleanor walked the 4 blocks to Brennan Tower. The day shift didn't know him. Of course they didn't. The day shift never knew the night shift. They worked in the same building and lived in different countries. She left a note at the front desk. Marcus, please call me when you can. I owe you more than coffee. Eleanor V. She wrote her cell number under it. Then she went home and waited. He didn't call that day. He didn't call the next day either. Marcus had gotten the note. He'd looked at it for a long time, sitting in the break room at the start of his shift, eating a peanut butter sandwich on bread that was a day past good. I owe you more than coffee. He folded the note and put it in his pocket. He didn't call. Here's why. Marcus had grown up in a neighborhood where rich people sometimes wanted to feel good about themselves by handing money to a poor person. His mother had cleaned houses for 30 years. Same 6 families, 3 of them since before Marcus was born. He'd watched her come home with a $100 bill at Christmas, and as just how so-and-so was just so generous. How she'd said, keep the change. How she'd insisted Marcus's mother take the leftover ham. He had loved his mother. He had hated those $100 bills, because the people who handed them out always thought the money settled something. They thought it made things even. They thought $100 was the same as respect, and a leftover ham was the same as being seen. It wasn't. His mother had cleaned their toilets for 30 years, and they'd never once asked her how her son was doing. They'd asked about the boy. They'd asked if she was managing. They'd never used his name. Marcus didn't carry that woman's box because he wanted a tip. He carried it because she was a person sitting in the cold, and he was a person walking past, and that was the math. If he called her now, she'd hand him an envelope. He'd take it. She'd feel better. He'd feel smaller. He didn't want to feel smaller. So he put the note in a drawer in his kitchen, next to the rubber bands and the dead batteries, and he went on with his life. 2 weeks passed. It was a Thursday. Marcus had picked Lily up from school because Mrs. Pollard had a doctor's appointment. They were walking home along the avenue. Lily was talking about a kid in her class named Tyler who could burp the alphabet, apparently as far as the letter Q, which Lily considered both impressive and unsanitary. They stopped at a small bakery to split a cinnamon roll. It was a thing they did sometimes, a small ritual. The bakery had a glass case full of pastries arranged with the kind of care that suggested the woman behind the counter had once worked somewhere fancier, and had decided at some point that fancier wasn't better. Eleanor Vance was sitting in the corner booth. She looked up. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the small girl holding his hand, who had a backpack shaped like a fox, and a single green mitten, because the other one had gone missing in October. For a second nobody moved. Then Lily, who didn't know any of this, said, "Daddy, can we get the kind with raisins?" Marcus said, "Yeah, baby, go pick." Lily went to the counter. Eleanor said quietly, "You didn't call." "No, ma'am." "Why?" He thought about how to answer. "Because you didn't owe me anything," he said. "And I didn't want you to think you did." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Will you sit down?" He sat. Lily was at the counter, deliberating between 4 different pastries with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice. Eleanor folded her hands on the table. "I want to tell you something," she said, "and I want you to actually hear it, not the polite version, the real version." "Okay." "When you stopped that night, I had spent the whole afternoon being treated like a piece of office equipment, like a stapler that wasn't working anymore, so they unplugged me and threw me out." She paused. "I built a career on the idea that if I worked hard enough, I'd matter. 11 years. And in 20 minutes, 2 security guards walked me out like I'd stolen something." She looked out the window, Snow was starting again, thinner than the night 2 weeks ago, but the same color, the same temperature. And then a stranger looked at me, not at my coat, not at my badge, not at the cardboard box, at me, and treated me like I was still a person. She turned back to him. "I'm not offering you money. I figured out after the note that you wouldn't take it, and I respect that. Okay. What I want to offer you is honesty. Can I do that?" "Yeah. I'm starting something. A small thing. I've spent 11 years approving and denying loans for people, and I'm tired of the deny side being the easy side. There's a real gap in this city for short-term lending to working people, folks who need $800 to fix a transmission so they can get to work. The bank doesn't touch that. The payday places eat them alive at 400% interest." She paused. "I want to start a community lender, small, honest, real interest rates, real underwriting. I have the savings to seed it. I have the licensing knowledge. I have the contacts." She looked at him. "What I don't have is somebody who actually knows what working people's lives look like, who can sit across from a guy who needs $800 and not see a credit score, see a person." Marcus didn't answer right away. Lily came back with a cinnamon roll the size of her face. "Daddy, look. That's a beauty, baby." Lily noticed Eleanor for the first time. "Hi, I'm Lily. I'm 9. I'm Eleanor. I'm 38. That's old." "It is, but not super old. Thank you, Lily." Marcus looked at Eleanor. "You're not offering me a job because I helped you that night?" "No." "You sure?" "Marcus, I've been a hiring manager for 11 years. I've interviewed maybe 400 people. I'm offering you a job because in the worst hour of my professional life, you saw me clearly. And I have spent 2 weeks thinking about the fact that the man who saw me clearly is the man I want sitting on the other side of that desk." She paused. "That's not gratitude. That's a hiring decision." He sat with it. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need." Marcus didn't say yes for 3 weeks. This is the part of the story that doesn't usually get told. In stories like this, the kind you watch on a Saturday with a bowl of popcorn, the working-class hero gets the offer, hugs his daughter, and shows up Monday in a borrowed tie. Cue the music, roll credits. Real life is slower than that. Marcus was scared. He was 34 years old. He had cleaned floors for 12 years. He was good at cleaning floors. He knew the chemicals, which ones bleached, and which ones just smelled like they bleached, which ones you had to ventilate for, and which ones you didn't, which ones turned a marble lobby into glass, and which ones left streaks no matter what. He knew the equipment. He knew the routes. He could clock in, do a 40,000 square foot floor in 3 hours, and clock out without thinking about it once. He had health insurance through the building. He had seniority. He had Mrs. Pollard next door, who watched Lily on his shifts and never charged him a dime, because Mrs. Pollard had outlived a husband and 2 cats and didn't need money. She needed company. He had a life that worked. A new job. A job in an office, a job where he had to wear a button-down shirt and talk to strangers and learn lending regulations. That wasn't a step up, not in his head. That was a cliff. What if he couldn't do it? What if he showed up, and he was the dumbest person in the room, and Eleanor realized she'd made a mistake? What if he quit his janitor job, and the new thing fell apart in 6th and he was 34 with no income and a kid who needed shoes? He stood in front of his bedroom mirror one Sunday, holding a button-down shirt his brother had left at his apartment 2 years ago and never come back for. White cotton, decent collar, a small grease stain on the cuff he'd never been able to get out. He held it up to his shoulders. The shoulders were too narrow. He folded it back up and put it in the drawer. He talked to Mrs. Pollard about it. She was 71. She'd taught 5th grade for 38 years before she retired. She'd seen a lot of Marcuses. "What does Lily think?" she asked. "Haven't told her." "Why not?" "Because if I tell her and then I say no, she'll be disappointed." Mrs. Pollard set down her tea. "Marcus," she said, "you're not protecting her. You're protecting yourself." He didn't answer. "Tell the girl. She's smart. She gets a vote." So he told Lily. He told her at dinner. He laid it out simple. "There's a lady. She wants me to work at a new place. It's office work. I'd wear different clothes. I might be home earlier some nights, later other nights. I don't know if I can do it." Lily chewed her stew thoughtfully. "Why don't you know if you can do it?" "Because I've never done it before." "Daddy." "Yeah. You taught yourself how to braid my hair when Mama died." He didn't say anything. "You did it really bad for a long time," Lily said. "Mrs. Pollard had to fix it sometimes before school. And one time I went to school with 3 braids, and they were all different sizes, and Tyler said I looked like a haystack." "I remember. But then it got better, and now it's good. Now you do the French kind." "Yeah." "So just do it bad first, then get good." He sat with that for a long time. "Daddy." "Yeah." "Is the lady nice?" He thought about Eleanor on the bank steps. Eleanor in the bakery. Eleanor saying, "That's not gratitude. That's a hiring decision." "Yeah, baby, she's nice." "Okay, then." She went back to her stew. He called Eleanor on a Sunday. "I'm in, but I have conditions." "Okay. I'm not your charity case. I want a real job description. I want a real salary. I want to be measured against real expectations. If I'm not cutting it in 6 months, you tell me. Straight." "Agreed." "And I want the title to be something. I don't want assistant to Eleanor. I want a job that has a name. How about community outreach officer?" He thought about it. "That'll do." "Marcus." "Yeah. I want to say something, and I want you to hear it the way I mean it." "Okay. You think I'm doing you a favor. I want you to know, and you'll figure this out in about 3 months, that I'm not. The thing I'm building doesn't work without somebody like you. I'm not lifting you up. I'm asking you to hold up your end of something I literally cannot do alone." He didn't answer for a moment. Then he said, "I hear you." "Good." "Eleanor." "Yeah." "Thank you." "You're welcome." The community lender opened in a storefront 4 blocks from the bakery. They called it Crossing Trust Lending. It was small. 2 desks, a couch in the waiting area that Eleanor had bought from an estate sale for $90 and reupholstered herself one weekend, a coffee pot that Marcus learned how to operate on day 3, because on day 1 it had made coffee that tasted like motor oil, and on day 2 he'd made it stronger to compensate. And Eleanor had taken 1 sip and said, kindly, "We're going to figure this out together." Eleanor handled the licensing, the compliance, the underwriting structure, the 1,000 small bureaucratic requirements that came with operating a financial institution in the state of Ohio, each of them a form, each of them a deadline, each of them a reason. A place like this didn't exist most places. Marcus did the thing nobody else could do. He sat across from people. He sat across from a woman who needed $1,200 for a security deposit on an apartment because she was leaving a bad marriage, and he didn't make her cry while explaining the paperwork. He let her take the form home. He told her she could come back when she was ready. He didn't ask what bad meant. He sat across from a man who'd been turned down at 3 banks for an $800 transmission loan, and he understood, without needing it explained, that the man's whole working week depended on that car. He approved it the same afternoon. The man came back 6 weeks later with the loan paid back in full and a tin of homemade peanut brittle his wife had made. Marcus shared it with Eleanor at the front desk. He sat across from a grandmother raising 2 grandkids, and he didn't make her feel small for needing $400 to keep the heat on. The first 6 months were brutal. Marcus made mistakes. He approved a loan he shouldn't have. A guy with 3 open accounts at payday lenders that he'd missed because he hadn't pulled the right report. He missed a documentation step on a form that mattered for state compliance. He mispronounced a regulatory term in front of a state auditor and the auditor. A kind man, fortunately, who'd been working in financial regulation for 22 years and had seen everything, gently corrected him without making it a thing. Eleanor corrected him too, fairly, without softening it, without making it worse than it was. She'd learned somewhere in her 11 years at Keystone that the only thing worse than being told you'd made a mistake was being told it gently while everyone in the room pretended you hadn't. He got better. By month 9, Crossing Trust had made 140 loans. The default rate was lower than the regional banks. The repeat customer rate was higher. People talked. Word moved through neighborhoods the way it always had, through barbershops and laundromats and church basements. And by month 12, there was sometimes a small line on Saturday mornings. By month 14, they had hired a 3rd employee. By month 20, they were profitable. Lily was 11 by the time the storefront had a real sign on it. A proper one, hand-painted by a man Marcus had grown up with, who'd become a sign painter and charged them next to nothing because, as he put it, "You're doing actual work, and I want my name on something that matters." She came to the office one Saturday to help her dad organize files. She was at the age where she liked feeling useful in adult places. She'd brought a sandwich and a book, and a small notebook of her own, in which she had decided to keep track of how many people came in. She watched Eleanor talk to a woman in the waiting area. The woman was crying a little. Eleanor handed her a tissue and a glass of water and sat with her until she could talk. Lily watched for a long time. Then she looked at her dad. "Daddy." "Yeah, baby." "Why is she crying?" "Because she's having a hard month, and she's embarrassed to need help." Lily thought about that. Eleanor doesn't make her feel embarrassed. No. That's a good thing to be good at. "Yeah," he said, "it is." She went back to the filing. A minute later she said, "Daddy." "Yeah, that's what you do too." He looked over at her. "What is?" "You make people not feel embarrassed when they have to ask for things." He didn't say anything for a second. He hadn't thought about it that way. "Where'd you learn that?" she asked. He thought about it. He thought about a Tuesday night in November 3 years ago. A woman on bank steps, a cardboard box, 11 degrees. "From watching somebody who deserved better than what she got," he said. "And from somebody who saw me before she knew anything about me. That's 2 people. Yeah. Cool." She went back to filing. It wasn't a ride to a diner. It was the experience of being treated like a person by somebody who didn't have to. And what she gave him 2 weeks later wasn't a job offer. It was the same thing back. "I see you, not the uniform, not the mop, You, and I think you're capable of more than the world has given you credit for. That's the trade. That's the whole story. You don't need to be rich to do this. You don't need to be powerful. You don't need a foundation or a non-profit or a TED Talk. You just need to notice when somebody is sitting in the cold, and you need to not walk past. 2 years later, on a cold Tuesday in November, Marcus was walking home from work. He saw a young man sitting on the curb outside a closed shop, hood up, backpack at his feet, phone in his hand, dark. Marcus stopped. He was wearing a coat that fit him now, a different coat than the one he'd worn that night 3 years ago. Wool, charcoal grey, a Christmas gift from Lily and Eleanor that he had pretended to be embarrassed by and secretly loved. "Hey man, you okay?" "I'm fine." Marcus looked at him for a second. Then he sat down on the curb beside him. "My name's Marcus," he said. "I just got off work. There's a diner 2 blocks up. They've got booths. I'll buy you a coffee." The kid looked up. "Why?" Marcus thought about how to answer. He thought about a woman on bank steps 3 years ago. A box, a name badge, 11 degrees, a waitress who tipped her head and minded her business, a 9-year-old at a counter picking out a cinnamon roll, 3 weeks of standing in front of a mirror with a borrowed shirt. "Because somebody did it for me once," he said. "And it changed everything." The kid hesitated. Then he stood up. They walked the 2 blocks together. Snow caught in their hair.